Find the slope and y-intercept of the linear equation 4x minus 6. Now, up above on this note sheet, you'll see that there's a variety of vocabulary. But right here, we have the definition of what the slope-intercept form of a linear equation is. This is commonly referred to as y equals mx plus b. M is the slope. Remember, that's the change in y over change in x, and we can calculate it with y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So that's what we mean by the slope. And then the b is the y coordinate of the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is the point 0, b, the place where the line crosses the y-axis. And we pull just the y value to put in this position of b. So when we're given an equation in slope-intercept form, we can pull those two pieces out. If I write the formula directly above it, I can see that the slope is in the position of 4. So the slope is 4, and the y-intercept is this last number in a point. So it's the point 0, negative 6. Now it really helps when I think of the slope as being 4, I want to remember that I can write that as 4 over 1. In other words, 4 up and right 1 when I think of it as a change in y over change in x. In addition to being able to look at an equation and identify the parts that we could use for making a graph, we want to be able to write an equation for a line when we're looking at the line on the graph. So we want to look for the same pieces. Notice right here we have the point 0, 4. That's the y-intercept. Notice that if I look for another point that's easy to identify, let's see, as we look through, looks like maybe, oh no, I'm not sure that's a point on it. I'm trying to find another easily identifiable point. That one looks like it's definitely a set of clear coordinates, so I'll go with that one. We've got the point negative 8, 7. So if I look in between these 2 points, I can see my change in y is actually going down as I read from left to right, and it's going down 3 spaces. As I read from left to right, I'm always looking towards the right, so that run, the x change in x, is always a positive amount. That looks like 2, 4, 6, 8 spaces. So when I go to identify my slope, step 1, my slope is negative 3/8. My y-intercept was the point 0, 4, so the b is 4. I can now plug those numbers in or substitute them into y equals mx plus b. So my equation will be y equals negative 3/8 x plus 4. I'm simply taking the pieces from the graph and putting them into the format. Next, we have an equation that's not given to us in slope-intercept form. In fact, it's not in any particular form at all. It's written as negative 6x minus 3y equals 9. If I want to identify the slope and y-intercept for this line, I first need it to look like y equals mx plus b. So I'll start by solving for y. If I add 6x to both sides, I'll be left with negative 3y equals 6x plus 9. Now I chose to write the 6x first because I remember I want this to look like mx plus b. So I want the x term first and the constant term second. Now I see that y is not completely alone yet. There's a negative 3 with it. That negative 3 is multiplying y. So I can reverse that by dividing both sides by negative 3. So y equals 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2x, and 9 divided by 3 is minus 3. So I've accomplished the first goal of solving for y. And then I have to identify the requested information. They asked me for the slope, which is negative 2, and they asked me for the y-intercept, which is the point 0, negative 3. Finally, we're asked to graph here. We're given a grid, and we're given a y equals mx plus b equation. So remember, this 3 is my slope, and I can think of 3 as being 3 over 1. So I can tell that my change in y is to go up 3, and my change in x is to go right 1. And then this -4 tells me that my y-intercept is the point 0, -4. So I go to my grid and I start down on the y-axis at -4. And then I follow my slope of 3 up and 1 to the right as I move across the grid, always making sure I go as far across the grid as I can go. Then I draw my line through all the points using a ruler if necessary to make sure that my line is actually straight. I put arrows on the ends of my line. I'm going to start by labeling that y-intercept, and then any of the other points that you've graphed along the line can be labeled. You must label at least one other point. I tend to just pick whatever the next point is, but it truly doesn't matter what that second point is. Next, we want to be able to write an equation in slope-intercept form for a line if we know 2 points that are on the line. So when I have 2 points, I can think of them as an x1, y1 and an x2, y2, which means if I have 2 points, I can calculate a slope. So 4 minus -9 divided by -8 minus 3. Well, that's really 4 plus 9, or 13, and that's really a -11. The only thing I would do differently here is put the negative in front of the fraction. Next, we're asked to write an equation in slope-intercept form. So I know the slope, but I don't yet know the y-intercept. So if I'm thinking y equals mx plus b, right now I know that my slope is -13/11. I don't know what this b is. And then I have these variables x and y. Well, each of those points that they gave me in the original problem is an x and a y pair. So if I choose to take this first point, I can remove the x and put in a 3. I can remove the y and put in a -9. And notice that leaves me with only the b as a remaining variable. So writing this equation out, I have -9 equals -13/11 times 3 plus b. Now that's some hefty fraction work, but not all problems will work out with such an ugly number. So first I would remember that -13/11 is like -13/11 times 3/1, and that when we multiply fractions, we multiply straight across when there's nothing to reduce. So we have -39/11 plus b equals a -9. Now I'm going to want to add this 39/11 to each side. So when it gets there, it needs a common denominator, so I've got to think about that. -9, if I want it to be over 11 instead of over 1, I would have to do 1 times 11. So -9 times 11 is -99/11. Plus the 39/11 will leave me with 60/11. That is a pretty unusual y-intercept, but it is what we have this time. So my final equation is going to be y equals, I'm going to use the slope that I found, -13/11 x plus 60/11. And we're pretty glad we only have to write that equation and not actually graph it.